I skipped over a big chunk of this trip because it had the sunlight. It pretty much looked like this and was terrible photography. So I just skipped it. I basically past New Leipzig and Mott and Reeder, I just skipped all those. The sun was basically either blacking everything out or we got this kind of light. So I'm here at the turn. We're going to head south on Highway, drawing a blank there, Highway 22 anyway. We're going to head toward Reeder, North Dakota. But in the meantime, we're going to have a few minutes where it's kind of dark like this, but then you are going to get some glorious prairie golden hour scenery to distract you from what I'm actually talking about in this video. So I spent the day outdoors. It's Saturday as I'm filming this Saturday evening. Spent the day outdoors digging in my garden, and then I went. I hate to use chemicals, but the weeds are so bad in my lawn. I do live in town, and I sprayed weed and feed around. Too late. A lot of puffballs out there, so I'm sure the dandelions will have an extra good crop later. But in the meantime, I've worked hard all day, took a shower, and now I'm ready to relax. So I'm going to make a video on why people ignore facts. So one of the I have no idea what that was about. One of the things I ran across recently is a cartoon by the Oatmeal. I will put a link here. I think it's link number 1, but anyway, the Oatmeal can be interesting. He does cartoons on diverse topics. Often they're very well researched cartoons. I've seen some interesting ones. There was a very interesting one on the hagfish. Or is it anglerfish? Sorry, anglerfish. That's the one that has the bright point of light that it dangles in front of itself. So, but that's not what I'm talking about here. This particular cartoon is about. Well, he starts out pretty innocently. He starts out talking about George Washington. And then he starts talking about George Washington's teeth. And then he talks about how, hey, George Washington didn't actually have wooden teeth. And then he points out that George Washington's dentures were actually a mix of like donkey and horse and whatever teeth. And you're like, okay, cool, interesting information. There's also some lead in there, by the way. Then he says, oh, and by the way, slave teeth. Like, yeah, teeth taken from slaves. And you can read the whole thing. He gives his sources, but yeah, George Washington, one of the greats of the founding of our country, one of our founding fathers, was wearing slave teeth. Now, it doesn't go too in depth with how they were obtained, but just think about that and let the horror of that sink in. And then he points out how angry people will get over that. And then he points out a few others, like Thomas Crapper didn't invent the toilet, Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't actually short, and I forget what all. He has a whole bunch. But then he starts talking about a particular part of the brain called the amygdala. And he points out that when confronted with facts, especially facts that really contradict your firmly held beliefs, the more deeply held, the worse, you will react just as if you've been physically attacked. I mean, emotionally, you will react the same way. And that's why people will have such a strong reaction to things. I think that whole creation thing is false. I have had people just blow up at me. And you're thinking, whoa, dude, that's not really something to get all that emotional about. But it's firmly held belief. Or you say something like, well, there is no God. Say that to the wrong person. Oh, watch out. Or, I think Allah and Jehovah are the same person, the same God. Oh, or even tell people that the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, and the Christian faith, which, by the way, is true, are all descended from the same religion. Oh, people don't like that. And so anyway, I find that interesting. So I thought, if we've been discussing arguments this whole time, maybe I should give you a little bit of research. Now, I will just point out here at the beginning if you're not very attached to an idea, it's hard to get too worked up. You know, so this really only comes in when people are really attached, but it still may explain why people can be perfectly pleasant, yet they totally ignore every fact you present. And I mean facts like research, actual data. You know, why do some people cling to the idea that there's no global climate change? In the face of facts and evidence that's overwhelming. So that's the kind of thing I'm getting into today. And I want to caution you, this is always a big one. You don't want to be poster boy for all this stuff I'm talking about, or girl, because that can happen too. Sometimes you might actually be the one who's clinging bitterly to a false idea or a false fact and totally denying anything that's true and ignoring facts that contradict your viewpoint. You may be the one. And then I've always found it interesting when people accuse me of this when they are flat out wrong. Oh man, I thought you was a science teacher. You should know this, man. I do know this, you're just an idiot. But you can't say that because amygdala and all. So I've got a few different areas I want to hit on. One of the areas I want to talk about is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now this has nothing to do with Freddy Krueger. This is actually based on a 1999 paper by Dunning and Kruger called Unskilled and Unaware of It: How Difficulties in Recognizing One's Own Incompetence Leads to Inflated Self-Assessments. And if you're interested, I did post a link to the abstract. I think you can get the paper from there. This kind of reading, as I said in my sources video, can be kind of dense sometimes. So just be ready for that. But here's the short, squirrely summary of that. We often rate ourselves much higher. You know, we believe we're a lot more competent than we actually are. And it becomes worse the poorer of a performer we are. You know, I just think about, well, I teach high school. What the heck? Let's throw them under the bus. I think about students saying what awesome drivers they are. And they're not. They just think they are. So if you're, or people like, the coach never puts me into play. Well, that's because you're a terrible player. He wants to win the games, not lose them. He only puts you in out of a pity vote once in a while. But they don't know that. They think they're awesome. And you know, that doesn't end with the end of school. That continues on. How many experts on evolution are there in the creationist world? They claim they are, but if they actually knew the science, they wouldn't be creationists now, would they? So anyway, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Actually, here's a good example. This was in one of my sources, but I don't remember which one. Reality TV competition shows. Now, I don't have TV, but I have watched a few of these types of shows. Like the one where they sing. Is that what it's called? American Idol? Something like that. And you watch some of the performances and you're like, really? You thought you were good enough to get on here? Or the cooking shows with amateur cooks and you're just thinking, wow, really? And of course, that's all selectively edited for TV to increase drama and so on. So don't take it too seriously. Things like, is it called Survivor? Survivor Island? Something like that. They get put on an island and get told to survive, and then they vote each other off. And you see a lot of people way overrate themselves. Dunning-Kruger effect. And if you read the paper, they have data to back it up. Not just emotion, not just feeling, but actual data. So definitely a paper worth reading. So I was wondering why I hadn't read the full Dunning-Kruger paper, and I just went back to the link. That's because it's hidden behind a paywall, and I wasn't interested in paying to read an article for a video on YouTube. So, yeah, I'll leave that to you if you wish to. But the Dunning-Kruger effect is very well known. And you can see it all over the place. All right, let's flip to another one. Another one I put on my list was something called confirmation bias. So, okay, so what the heck? Let me give you a little context here. The reason I bring up Dunning-Kruger effect is people will think they know more about the topic than they actually do. Fair or not, I don't know, but they think they do. Therefore, they think you're arguing with an expert. And even if they're not an expert, they still feel like they know a lot. Get into any kind of a climate change battle or evolution battle and you'll see it. I'm not making this stuff up. All right, now another one I want to throw out there to you is something called confirmation bias. And we all have to be careful of that. You know, the person who says, well, I only watch the Young Turks because I want my news from a progressive point of view. Or, well, Fox News is the only unbiased source out there. You know, those kind of things. We often tend to search for an information, and we tend to interpret it in a way that confirms our own misconceptions. I have a link here that talks about how that can play into science. You know, why do certain popular theories go on for so long before... And when I say theory, I mean that in the fullest scientific sense. You know, why do people look to, or hypotheses if you're uncomfortable with the word theory, why are certain wrong things held on to for so long? Why do certain people just refuse to accept climate change? You know, it's confirmation bias. If I'm getting my information on evolution from Answers in Genesis, I'm not getting the full story. Now, I'm looking here and I'm thinking, wow, I did not leave a whole lot of sources on confirmation bias, and I'm going to just double check. Oh, here's a good article. Yeah, from the New York Post. Why losers have delusions of grandeur. That's kind of a combination of Dunning-Kruger and confirmation bias. Well, you remember that one time I made a basket at the game? Yeah, I remember. I also remember all the times you've missed baskets and passed the ball to the other team. So yeah. So you might be thinking, okay, but I would never fall into any of those. Wrong. We all do it. So now if you're using Cenk Uygur or Rush Limbaugh or, what's that guy's name? Alex Jones as your sources, that's not science. Science is actually set up so it will take care of confirmation bias in the long term. I linked to an article about eliminating confirmation bias in science, and there were several ways that they did that. I'm sorry, you can't see me, but I'm looking at my notebook and at my computer screen and at a sheet of paper with some stuff written on it, so my eyes are darting all over the place. Anyway, that's why when I started doing these more well-researched driving videos, I quit showing my face. Anyway, where was I? Okay, I just listed a left-wing and some right-wing sources. And, you know, I'm not claiming that they're all wrong or they're all right. I'm just using them as examples of a certain bias. Anyway, science is quite a bit different. Because here's what science does. Science has tools built in to attack all of those different sources of bias. For example, one of the things that you do as a good scientist, before you've even let your stuff see the light of day, is you spend time looking at every single possible objection that people may raise. He talks about some kind of a microscope imaging thing in the article, and how most of the time was spent doing exactly that. Not doing the research. The research was quick and easy, but actually looking up objections, figuring out objections. But then they do something else as scientists. You subject your discoveries and your information to peer review. That means other people get to look at your results. And here's the glorious prairie scenery finally. You saw flashes of it before. Golden hour, you get the long shadows, and it just looks awesome. It looks even more awesome when you're not looking at it through a dash cam. But anyway, it's almost like a full contact sport. You hold it up for ridicule. You let the ideas be exposed. You let other scientists question them and tear them apart. Maybe you go back and you have to reevaluate some fundamental assumptions in your model. That's a powerful thing science has built into it. And I will just point out, consensus doesn't mean you're right. You know, if the consensus is country music is awesome, that doesn't mean it's true. Scientific consensus is quite a different thing. Scientific consensus means a lot of scientists agree based on the evidence. So don't think of scientific consensus as an appeal to popularity. It's not. A scientific consensus is a lot of scientists have looked at the evidence, and in other words, it's been through the process of peer review. I find it unlikely we will discard current discoveries. We will most likely modify the model slightly, refine the model, perhaps discover that, our model isn't as complete as we thought. Like, for example, most of your high school physics class is spent doing classical mechanics, and then you discover this whole Einstein relativistic stuff, and you're like, whoa, that totally proves Newton wrong. Well, no. Newton is a special case of Einstein. And Newton is perfectly valid here on Earth. We've just discovered that, when you're going super duper extra fast, you need the relativistic model. So, anyway, I would take the scientific consensus over whatever Rush Limbaugh and Alex Jones are spouting off today. All right, now I have one other, and I actually have a little side story that's about to occur, so I want to get through this here. Something called the backfire effect. Now, what the backfire effect is, that's, why don't I quote Peter Boghossian here. Not taking ideas personally is made easier by the meta-belief that holding certain beliefs does not make you a better person. I used to be very conservative in certain ways, and, I always believed that being conservative was just the more manly way to be. Well, that was the culture I was in. I mean, northern Pennsylvania, Grove City College, and then North Dakota. So it's better to hold those beliefs because you're a better person if you hold those beliefs. It's only bedwetting pinko liberals that hold liberal ideas. Well, that's a big wall to climb over. So the thing with the backfire effect is that you present facts and you're like, I have ironclad facts here. And it actually makes them more sure they're right. I have had people tell me, I can't prove it, but I know you're wrong because I know what I feel. I was discussing was a Southerner, but that has nothing to do with the story. I was actually discussing pregnancy rates in Georgia. This person was complaining about all the unwed mothers and how that didn't used to be a thing. So I presented him with actual data about pregnancies in Georgia and showing the the amount of unplanned pregnancies and teen pregnancies is actually down in the areas he's talking about. I've presented facts about how crime is down nationwide to people, and they're just like, well, that Obama's FBI website. I'm curious if now they would believe it since Trump is president. Who knows? But the facts actually backfire. And again, that goes back to amygdala. It's like, not just have I given contradictory information, you need to reevaluate it. I have attacked you physically. Your brain, your amygdala, is reacting. Oh, and I pulled over here to help these guys out. You might have noticed a broken down vehicle. I know everybody has a cell phone now, but I had just a weird feeling about that, which I don't know if I helped them or not. I'll tell you that story in a little bit. But I talked to them for a while because they spoke Spanish, and that was awkward because my Spanish is from high school. But anyway, the backfire effect, they're feeling physically attacked. You know what? We can't just stare at the scenery. Okay, I'll finish the backfire effect up later. I just cut out 5 minutes of you watching the clouds move across the sky while I tried to discuss it. What happened, I let the guys go ahead of me here. Something was wrong with their transmission is what I figured out. So they had to go very slow, and so I followed them in case their car quit, and they saw that we're coming close to the town of Reeder, North Dakota. And they asked me, how big is Reeder? And I said, it's very small. I could not remember the Spanish word for small, so I just said very small, and I, hold my fingers close together. But the word small, pequeño. I mean, seriously, it's there now, but it wasn't there during that conversation. Trying to explain that it's very small, and they're not likely to find anything there to help them on a Saturday evening. I couldn't get it across to them. They said, how many million? And I tried saying 100, because we're looking at about 100 people in the town of Reeder, seriously. And I could not get it across to them. They had their GPS and their cell phone, but I could not communicate with them. The language barrier was too great. I didn't have enough Spanish. They didn't have enough English. So I just behaved, I just followed them, hoping things would work themselves out. And so while we're following them, more on the backfire effect. So, so the truth is that when you share or when you have certain deeply held beliefs, facts aren't going to change them. Facts might even make you more sure you're right. I don't know why I'm right, but I know I'm right because I feel I'm right. What do? How do you talk to somebody like that? Well, it's not easy. So here is, I think this goes back to my first video, actually. First of all, let tempers cool. If they're having an emotional reaction, if their amygdala is working, the reasoning part of their brain is shut down. And heck, you might be getting dragged into that whole emotional thing too. Let's just be clear on that. So, it's better to walk away. As somebody I know puts it, somebody has to be the adult. So, yeah, let tempers cool. Another thing is, often there's a whole face-saving thing involved. You discuss on YouTube comments or an internet forum or Twitter or whatever. You have to save face. You don't want to be seen to be defeated by the other person. So that's another reason to walk away for a while. And perhaps there might be a way to discuss it away from an audience. When I started teaching, I used to have this bad habit of getting into arguments with students. I'd know I was right, but we'd argue. And one of my colleagues pulled me aside and she says, never wrestle with a pig. You just get dirty and the pig enjoys it. And she's right. I mean, now if a student tries arguing with me, because they do all the time, I'll say, I'm not going to argue with you right now. If you're really worried about it, we can talk about it after class. Boom, problem solved. They don't like it. Sometimes kids want to argue with you just because they're bored, and that's entertainment. But anyway, so yeah, try and do it away from an audience or just at a later time. Perhaps you can show how they would benefit personally. Somebody may have a job mining coal, and so they've got a big problem with people that want to do renewable energy. Maybe you can find a way to show how renewable energy would benefit them. I mean, I'm thinking all these unemployed coal miners. Maybe renewable energy where they live would give them jobs again. Never forget. Well, actually, here's another one. Think of it as a partnership. The two of you trying to find the truth together. That will help you be less emotional. They may not see it that way, but if you can manage to get them to see it that way, maybe they'll feel like you have come to this conclusion together. And then finally, never forget you may be the one that's undergoing the backfire effect. It's always possible. Okay, for those of you following my other story, that vehicle up ahead is that one with the two Spanish-speaking men in it. And we just passed the town of Reeder, so I was starting to wonder what's going on. I thought maybe they saw a sense, because my own town actually has a lot more to offer. 1,500 people. We actually have motels. We have mechanic. But then they pulled over here. So clearly they didn't decide to go on to my town. By the way, we're on Highway 12. So, got out of the car. Sorry, I'm leaning towards the microphone here. I don't think you're going to see it all because I think I shut the car off for this conversation. But talked to them, and they thanked me over and over. That guy that's gesturing there took a picture. There's me, blocking the sun. That guy gesturing there took a picture of himself with me. And then they turned around and drove back to Reeder. And I don't know how the story ended. As soon as I got home, I posted it on Facebook, hoping somebody who I know in Reeder might be available to help them. Or actually, I don't know anybody in Reeder. I didn't know what else to do. So they went on to Reeder, and I hope for their sake that it ended well. But when I heard them say million, I'm doing the accent wrong, but I just like, no, that's not Reeder. And of course, 100 wasn't coming to me either, so I did say 100, but I don't think they quite understood. And you'd think they would have noticed Reeder. You didn't see it because of the sun, but I don't know. I don't know how it ended. Maybe they were just happy to find civilization, and somebody, worst case, I guess they go to the bar and somebody there helps them out. I don't know how it turned out for them, honestly. But anyway, I headed on down Highway 12 to Scranton. I want to finish up this backfire effect thing. I will probably clip the video, take you into Scranton, because I do want to show you that. And then I had supper in Scranton and then headed home. So anyway, where's my notes? Backfire effect. So anyway, I want to mention one other thing that's actually contributing to this difficulty of convincing people. If you look at the media, whenever they discuss an issue, they always want to appear objective. So they'll bring on two people with opposing viewpoints. Here's a climate change denier, here's a scientist. Here's a creationist, here's a scientist. Here's somebody for gay marriage, here's somebody against gay marriage. Whatever the issue is. And it gives the appearance of balance. It makes it appear as though you're listening to both sides of the argument. But here's the thing. A lot of it is not an argument. Global climate change, scientists are quibbling about details in it. They're not quibbling about whether it's a reality. Same thing with evolution. Scientists are not quibbling about whether it's a reality. They're quibbling about details within it. So when the media, who are not, for the most part, scientists, brings in two sides to debate a scientific issue, they're making viewers think that both sides are equally valid, and they're not. One side actually has evidence and facts and scientific consensus on its side. The other side has holes to poke, conspiracy theories, nonsense, and maybe they'll whip out the old Bible just for good measure. So I think the media is doing a disservice to how we interpret things. And yes, I know Rush Limbaugh would flip his gourd if you only bring on the climate scientists to discuss global climate change. Well, you know what? There would be a reason for that. And the truth is, what that will do is that'll help people see that, oh, one side has all the experts, the other side doesn't. The side that does not is denying reality. And that's what I wish media would do. But the trouble with the media is two things. They're not scientists. Second thing, they don't want to appear biased. Well, it is not biased to present truth. And it actually makes good TV to present two people who are really darn passionate on two sides of the argument, arguing it over whatever it is. And that's why they do it. So we'll sum up here, and then I will quickly fast forward to Scranton. By the way, you can't see it. Oh, yes, you can. Speaking of global climate change and whatnot, there's the Keystone Pipeline laying in Gascoyne, North Dakota along Highway 12, or at least a piece of the Keystone Pipeline. I once went down on a gravel road that parallels it, and it's a public road, by the way, and a security guard came over to chase me off. Interesting. I told her I was on a public road, and I said, I'm going to keep taking pictures. So she sat there in her truck while I took pictures from the public road till I drove away. Okay, lady, I'm not going to go steal one of your stupid pipes. All right, so back on topic. So facts do not convince people. That was my thesis at the beginning of this series of videos, and I'm reminding you of it at the end. In fact, they may have an emotional reaction because their amygdala is tickled. Same emotional reaction you'd get if I physically attacked them. So, Dunning-Kruger effect. We think we know more than we know. We think we're experts when we're not. That's what the Dunning-Kruger effect is. And the less we know, the more we think we know. Look at reality TV competitions. Confirmation bias. We often put ourselves in an echo chamber where we're surrounded by what we believe. And in this era of internet, if I'm a right-wing conservative, I can just feed myself a steady diet of Breitbart and Alex Jones nonsense. If I'm a left-winger, I can give myself some Young Turks and some David Pakman and some Kyle Kulinski and Ben Dixon. There is something called a backfire. And you know, what I would say with that, go to the original source, evaluate the claims. You know, I think of the ones I listed, David Pakman's usually the most reasonable. But even he can get excited about stuff that turns out not to be true if you go back to the original source. So view sources, don't just view the editorialized presentation of them, especially if you really agree or really disagree. Go to original sources. That's what I get tired of on Facebook. A lot of what people post is not original sources. It is editorial media. And then finally, beware of the backfire effect, which is sometimes presenting the facts actually makes them more sure they're right. Crime rates are down. Here's the FBI statistics. I know what I feel. Okay, buddy. And if you are going to discuss with people, let tempers cool. Because like I said, it's the amygdala reacting. They are not thinking rationally. Discuss it away from an audience. Show how it might benefit them personally. Wait. Give them time to process what you said. Outside the influence of the amygdala. Think of the discussion as a partnership. By the way, these grain elevators coming up here are Scranton, so I timed this perfectly. And don't forget, you are vulnerable too. You are just as vulnerable to all these things I mentioned as the other people are. Just because you're liberal, just because you're a scientist, just because you're conservative, just because you're libertarian doesn't mean you're going to be more right. So, quite by accident, but probably thanks to having an outline, I did time it right. We're coming up on Scranton. Scranton is actually approached from that bridge, which goes over railroad tracks. So you actually turn away from Scranton onto this highway. This is actually new construction. There used to be 2 entrance ramps onto this bridge, one from this side, one from the other side. That's gone now. But anyway, you go up this Hoosamawatsat here, this ramp, cross the bridge into Scranton. So that bridge is the only way into Scranton from the south. From the north, there's another road. Scranton is a small town of between 400 to 500 people. It has a school of, I guess, around 120 students, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that's 120 K through 12. Make of that what you will. I actually once looked at a job here. Back then, Scranton was at around 160 students, K through 12. But I decided, it's too small. Because that was part of what was making me look anyways. I was tired of teaching 6 different classes. So as you drive into Scranton, of course, the grain elevators dominate the skyline. Big cities have skyscrapers. Small towns have grain elevators. But not much business left in Scranton. But something was going on tonight because look at all these people parked downtown. And I recognize that because my neighbor owns that. They barbecue and do steaks and stuff in that trailer. So there was something going on in Scranton. Because I had pizza here. I didn't have the barbecue because it was sold at a bar and I just don't do bars. But anyway, they do have a small grocery store. And there's a couple other small surviving businesses. It doesn't have much of a business section. Honestly, it's too close to my town. My town has kind of destroyed its business section. But there is stuff in Scranton. And a lot of people work in my town and then live in Scranton because the housing's cheaper in Scranton. When I had to buy a house, I actually did briefly consider buying a house in Scranton. But then I would have had to drive every day, and I really didn't want to do that. So I figured long term it's worth it to pay a little bit more and get a house in my town. So that's what I did. But anyway, I'm going up the hill. This is actually the way that would get you out of Scranton to the north, but I'm going to turn up here. Being a teacher, what am I interested in a town? I want to see the school. So I'm going to swoop by the school and then go down Main Street and park. So this is the school. It is a K-12 school. Like I said, it's around 120 students, thereabouts. It's a newish building from the 1960s, so about the age of the school where I teach. The science room is pretty nice. Parts of the building are showing their age, but it is a nice building. We just had back in February, we had I have no idea why I'm just sitting there. We did our district science Olympiad. at Scranton. Next year I have to host it, so God, that's going to be a trip. Anyway, so they, that's the gym. There's a cafeteria. The science room is one of these along the front here. So yeah, one thing I felt was funny about Scranton is it just felt, and this is a feeling, not anything objective or measured, but when I drove through it all those years ago, my feeling was I was driving through an East Coast housing development. I didn't feel like I was driving through a small town. It just didn't, I mean, it is a small town, but it didn't feel like a small town. And that's honestly the other reason why I didn't apply for the job. I just didn't like the feel of the town. Maybe I would have been happy there. I don't know. Now, what ended up happening is actually the science teacher from my school went over to Scranton that year, and my school hired a science teacher who later on got married and moved away to live with his wife, and I took his job, and then he and his wife moved back, and he now teaches in another science position at my school and is the tech coordinator. So funny how it all worked out. But anyway, this is Main Street, Scranton. There are some open businesses. There are also a lot of businesses here that have buildings, but they are closed and no longer anything in them. I can't remember if this is one of those. It looks like it's probably abandoned, but I don't know. But yeah, thank you for coming along for the ride. I will be back with more footage next week, hopefully, but I need to figure out a topic. So till then, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.